Okay, so we shall commence here. I'm sure other people will be joining us. Welcome and thank you for joining us on this really interesting topic. We've had a lot of interest, a lot of questions here about this topic, about demystifying the housing voucher process and the experience. Many members of our community, many of our neighbors have asked, who gets vouchers? How does it work? What benefits do people derive from that? What are they entitled to? What are they required to do? And hopefully over the course of this hour, we'll be able to answer some of those questions and help, as the term says, as the title says, demystify the process. I'm going to start by tossing to Jean-Michel Giraud, our president and CEO. He in turn will pass off to Anna Fogel of DHS, who will in turn pass to L. Arnold of Friendship Place. And Anna will talk about the process in general. Elle will talk a bit about how it impacts the folks we serve. And then the floor is open for questions. I've received some that I can certainly supplement the chat room with, based on some feedback I've received from others, some of you who are on this call. But this is always more exciting and interesting if the questions come naturally and more organically from the chat room. So please, by all means, place your questions in the chat and feel free to ask them, and then we'll do what we can to answer them. So I'm going to mute myself now and toss to Jean-Michel, who can introduce us a little more thoroughly. Jean-Michel.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for being online with us this afternoon for this conversation. As Chris said, we thought it might be important to help people understand how the voucher process works, who gets what, who gets services, who does not, so that there's a greater understanding in our community and beyond of this process. So we have two great speakers with us this afternoon, Anna Fogel of DHS and L. Arnold, who has been at Friendship Place for a long time, serving in permanent supportive housing, and then more recently promoted to assistant director at Valley Place, this wonderful new short-term housing facility for singles that we run in Anacostia. Again, the goal is to foster greater understanding, to have these community conversations around the presence of voucher holders in Upper Northwest. As some of you know who were on the other webinars, as the historical provider in Ward 3 at Friendship Place, we feel that we have a responsibility to provide these educational opportunities to community members and to foster a dialogue so that we can lower the level of stigmatization that has been reported toward the voucher holders. So I'm not going to go on too long. We have a great program, and as Chris said, please ask plenty of questions so that we can clarify everything you're wondering about. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much. And I'm just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Anna Fogel. I'm the Deputy Administrator for Permanent Housing, which includes all of our voucher programs at DC's Department of Human Services. And thank you so much to Friendship Place and the whole team for hosting this very important conversation and for including DHS in the discussion. So as both Jean-Michel and Chris mentioned, I'm just going to provide in very brief remarks, a little overall context on the voucher program in the district, and I'll provide more detail on the Department of Human Services voucher programs, which is a subset of the broader voucher programs in DC. I'll talk a little bit about how people get matched to a voucher, how they find a place to live, and what services are associated with, especially with DHS's voucher programs. But happy to answer more questions. I'm just going to talk a little bit to make sure we're sort of all using some of the same vocabulary and have some of the same foundational knowledge. And then I'd love to have more of a discussion, as Jean-Michel said. So just to provide a little bit of overall context on this voucher program in the district, there's about 24,000 total vouchers across the district. And these include clients of and referrals from many different agencies. So the Housing Authority is, of course, very central to the voucher programs, but there are also, of course, our agency, the Department of Human Services, Department of Behavioral Health has voucher programs, the VA, the Department of Aging and Community Living, or DACL. And the majority of these vouchers are what we call tenant-based, which means that the resident who is matched to a voucher can find their own unit on the private market from a private landlord, And the housing authority pays a portion of their rent. So tenants are expected to pay 30% of their income. There's a smaller number of vouchers, which I think will be less the focus of this conversation, which are what we call unit-based, or you'll sometimes hear project-based or site-based, which means that the voucher is connected to the unit itself. So a resident who is matched to that voucher lives only in that specific unit. But the vast majority of these 24,000 vouchers are what we call tenant-based. So people are going to choose where they want to live on the private market. And as Jean-Michel alluded to, depending on the program, vouchers come with different levels of services, from just a rental subsidy with really no additional case management support, all the way to very intensive, daily or weekly support. And the idea is that residents are matched to the program that really best fits their needs and what they want to stay stably housed. And so, of course, there's a lot of 24,000 people. You have a lot of different sort of needs for services. And so, as I said, I'm going to focus on DHS's voucher program, since that's where I sit and what I'm more of an expert in, and because our programs do account for a pretty significant percentage of the total voucher holders in the district. But just to sort of contextualize who we are and who we're serving, we provide, and through our programs, permanent housing vouchers to residents who've experienced homelessness or at risk of homelessness, are part of what we call the continuum of care in the homeless services system. And our programs serve about 6,000 of the residents who are housed with vouchers in the district. And there's another, 3,000 or so who are still in the process of looking to use their voucher and lease up in a unit. Okay, that was a lot of context setting. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of the process, how residents get matched to a voucher, what happens when someone is matched to a voucher, how they find a place to live, and then what services are associated with them, since I think that's what I'll spend most of my time on, because I think that's a large part of the interest here. So first, how do people even get assigned to a voucher or matched? HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the federal agency, requires that jurisdictions have what we call a coordinated entry system. You locally might hear it referred to as CAP, which is Coordinated Assessment and Housing Placement, but I'll try not to use all of these acronyms. And the idea here is that it is a coordinated, standardized way to distribute scarce housing resources for people who need them. So what happens is everyone who is receiving services in the continuum of care is assessed using a national assessment of sort of vulnerability and need, and then entered onto what we call a by name list, just literally a list of everyone who may need services. And then this is prioritized based on the length of time someone's experiencing homelessness and their sort of score on this assessment. And the goal is really, because we don't have enough resources for everyone, to make sure that everyone is matched to the appropriate housing resource for them that will best serve them and their family in a fair, centralized way. And this coordinated entry system is not controlled by DHS or by any government agency. It is really a community-run process, and it's really run by the Community Partnership for the Prevention of Homelessness, or TCP, which is a nonprofit organization that oversees this process and the continuum of care. Just to briefly talk about sort of who is eligible to even be on this list and be considered for DHS's voucher programs, clients within DHS's programs have to have a history of chronic homelessness, which again includes length of time homeless and also a chronic disabling condition. Okay, so that's how people get matched. There's through these regular meetings that happen multiple times a month. It's really a community process where there's lots of entities that are part of these meetings and that are involved in helping sort of intake people into the system, put on the by name list, and prioritize. So once you're matched in one of these coordinated entry meetings and process to a voucher, how do residents find a place to live? So as soon as someone is matched to a voucher, they're assigned to a case manager. And this case manager supports residents and their clients in going through the housing application process, in determining their eligibility and helping them search for a unit or a place to live. And again, as I said before, but I'm going to say it one more time because it's really important, residents who have a housing voucher choose where they want to live based on what they're looking for in a unit, in a building, in terms of amenities, in the neighborhood, the school system, just like I'm just like everyone else, whether you're a voucher holder or not. No one is placed anywhere by DHS or by anyone else. And the other thing I'll just mention is that landlords are not allowed to discriminate by source of income. So it truly is the same process that people who don't have a voucher go through and looking for a place to live. So this can take, as I'm sure many of you know, it's a very tight housing market if you've been looking for a unit yourself. So this can take some time, but once people have found a place to live and lease up, what are the services that people receive? And I'm looking at the time. I'm gonna kind of keep moving because I want to make sure there's lots of time for questions. So I'm going to talk about two programs because DHS really has two main voucher programs, and they have different levels of services based on really what residents need. So the first is permanent supportive housing, or PSH, and the second is targeted affordable housing, or TAH, but I'll try not to use the acronyms. So permanent supportive housing, which is our largest program for voucher holders, is intended for residents who need a permanent rental subsidy. So these are not time limited. This is as long as somebody needs it and is eligible for it, as well as intensive case management services. So that's who this is intended for, somebody who needs intensive case management services to stay stably housed. And in terms of the services, we think of it in terms of sort of two different phases. The first is before somebody has found a place to live. They are required to have weekly touch points with their case manager, including at least 2 in person every month. After residents find a place to live in our house, this is the second phase. It's a little more intensive right after they move in the first 3 months, but then after that, they're required to have two contacts with their case manager every month, including at least 1 in person. And this is really, this is sort of a minimum. If there's a crisis or additional need, people can certainly meet with their case managers more often. And we know that our case managers are often in touch with clients more frequently, texting and emailing and calling, as well as seeing people in their homes every month or so. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention about the services piece is that permanent supportive housing case management is not the only services that residents in the the permanent supportive housing program are receiving. Case managers connect their clients and their families to lots of other community supports as needed. Everything from behavioral health services through the Department of Behavioral Health, supports for children in school, their primary care physician, and more on the physical health side, benefits access, financial and life skills education. I mean, there's a whole host of things. And we know that pretty much every single one of our clients in permanent supportive housing is receiving a lot of additional community supports, as well as their case management through the program. And then the unit-based or site-based vouchers that I talked about before, where it's attached to a specific unit versus a tenant, I just mentioned here because they're often, many of these sites often have on-site services, which can allow for some more intensive level of services as needed. Okay, so that's permanent supportive housing. That's the larger program. I'll very briefly talk about targeted affordable housing, which is a slightly different program. It is also a permanent rental subsidy, but it has lighter touch case management. It's really intended for people who just need less supportive services to stay stably housed. And so for these clients, after they find a place to live and lease up, they receive quarterly home visits and contacts from their case manager. So it's really a different sort of population, and they get, therefore, different services. And then I think just the last thing I'll say, because I know it's already 12:15, is that these programs, the permanent supportive housing and the targeted affordable housing programs, have really grown significantly in the last couple of years. They've been in the district for something like 15 years, but they've grown a lot in the last few years, and they'll really continue to grow because they are such an important tool for the district's vision to end homelessness. And so the mayor and city council have really intentionally increased the funding for these programs to support that vision in recent years. So I think I will stop there. I think that was maybe a little longer than I was supposed to go, so apologies. But I'm very happy to answer questions. I know there's a lot of other people. I can see some names on here. I know there's some other experts in this topic, so I hope others will also join in. But I think for now, I'm going to pass to Elle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then happy to answer questions after that.
Yes. So Elle, do you mind talking a little bit about how this impacts the people Friendship Place serves, what we know about the services provided to them, just really the process as it applies to them?
Yes, absolutely. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Everybody's okay? Okay. So thank you, Anna, for that context, because as we know, the subsidy program is a very, very dense process. So what you gave is just the tip of the iceberg. So thank you so much for going into the level of detail that you did. Again, I'm Arnold-Artis. I am the Assistant Director for Valley Place, a transitional housing, a bridge housing program at Friendship Place. Prior to that, I was a case manager and then the project coordinator for a permanent supportive housing program for families at Friendship Place. Prior to joining Friendship Place, I worked on an attain where we really did a lot of community treatment and work to support people with getting housed. Each one of those programs were housing first model, which means housing is the priority so that we can work on the rest of the things that you need to get yourself to a more stable and comfortable position. So a little bit about who we're seeing receive housing vouchers in Friendship Place and with my work just as a case manager around the city for Housing First programs. We're seeing both families and individuals. We're seeing those with income restrictions whose combined income is less than 50% of the area's median income. Those impacted by socioeconomic barriers such as underemployment, lack of affordable childcare, generations of poverty, and housing discrimination. Those experiencing mental health or substance use challenges, those with physical disabilities or health challenges, those with a history of chronic homelessness for one or more of the above reasons. And those experiencing trauma or domestic violence or trying to escape trauma situations. So that's, in my experience, who we've been seeing receive housing vouchers. So you don't have to fall in all of these categories. You can fall in one, two. Unfortunately, a lot of these concerns and issues intersect. So you'll see families experiencing domestic violence with the history of generational poverty. So you'll see a lot of intersection between these issues. You can see someone with a physical challenge that has caused them to not be able to afford housing anymore, end up on the streets, and then develop a mental health challenge. So it's not just one, it's not just all, it's any combination of those things. So just a little bit about the benefits of housing vouchers and subsidies and how they've benefited the population that we've worked for. It gives recipients an opportunity to actually put housing first and obtain stable shelter in order to focus on other areas that need to be improved, such as employment, so that you can focus on your physical or your mental health goals, and just so that you can be safe from trauma. As we all know, relocation and housing is amongst the top 5 to 10 stressors that we'll experience in a lifetime. And that's when we know where we're going from one place to another. So imagine not knowing where you're going from one moment to another. How much higher or how much more stressful is the relocation or the housing process? Another benefit, some voucher types, as Anna mentioned, is accompanied by case management services to ensure housing stability. And a lot of that is determined based on an assessment tool called the VSPDAT. What that stands for is a vulnerability index service prioritization decision assessment tool. Like Anna said, there's lots of acronyms and they're almost all usually a mouthful, which is why the acronyms are almost full words themselves, but it's called a VSPDAT. And that's how the coordinated entry system kind of determines who's at the highest level of vulnerability for being homeless again, based on how you present your mental health issues, your trauma history, or your medical issues. It kind of determines how much more vulnerable are you to homelessness, and it kind of helps them to prioritize. That's that prioritization. Well, that's where that comes in. It's also the benefits of Housing Voucher is designed to alleviate the burden of rising rent costs. If you've ever been a Washingtonian, and particularly now, you know rent is very high. So it really does help alleviate some of the rent burden, whether temporarily through a rapid rehousing project or permanently through a PSH or TAH program, depending on the participant's level of need. And then just basically, just to summarize, it gives you a second chance at getting your life back on track. The biggest expense anybody will account is usually their housing. So if we can support, subsidize, or alleviate that expense so that you can allocate your time and resources on getting other areas of your life in order, that increases your likelihood of success in those areas. So it just gives a second chance. And then a little bit about the challenges of obtaining a housing voucher and throughout the process that we're seeing. Unfortunately, not all those that are in need will be able to gain access to this resource. The level of need in DC and other major cities across the US is just too great based on voucher wait list. Because right now we actually just received an article and I got a chance to read it, and it was so on time, that says the Housing Authority right now has not opened up their wait list for the voucher program since 2013. Right now in 2022, they're pulling names from a wait list of people who signed up in 2004. That's just how big the volume of those in need are. And consider all the changes that could have occurred from when you enrolled in 2004 to now, 2022. We've incurred pandemics, all types of other major issues that can impact your need for services. And I mentioned coordinated entry, which is another entry point into homeless services. That list is also rather extensive. We have more people in need that will be able to get access in a timely manner. Some people try to wait it out and experience greater years of homelessness, or decide that they won't be able to connect to resources in DC and end up leaving. Another challenge is underfunded voucher and affordable housing projects. There's just not enough funding for all the people in need. The district is not able to keep up with the level of need and get the necessary approvals. That's why legislation becomes so important, and having these conversations with local representatives, because it's a major problem, and the city doesn't always get approved for housing projects that they need in order to serve these populations. And then affordable housing. Also, when I mentioned the VSPDAT, which determines the vulnerability assessment, unfortunately, not all recipients are even honest on those intakes because of the stigma surrounding what it is. A lot of people don't want it documented that they have a mental health concern, or that there's a physical disability there, or that they come from a history of domestic violence or trauma in their household. That's just not something that's comfortable to disclose when completing an intake. So we don't always get the most accurate picture of those with the highest level of need because of the stigma that's associated with it. The application process for housing voucher, once your name is called, can be a bit cumbersome and confusing for somebody without case management needs. For somebody going through the reasons why they need housing, it can be a little cumbersome. It requires access to vital documents that can be challenging to obtain if you're experiencing mental health crisis or challenges, or physical crisis, or economic disparities, because as we know, excuse me, excuse my sneeze.
Bless you.
please excuse me. As we know, those processes can be long. You have to go down to vital records. Things were closed for a while during the pandemic. You got to be able to know where to go. Something as simple as getting your birth certificate, if you were born out of state, can be a bit of a challenge, but that's something that's required. Thankfully, the Housing Authority and DHS are starting to implement things, some workarounds for the paperwork delay, so that's not as much of a factor, but that's newly being introduced to the table, workaround for those type of challenges. And then also, once vouchers are received, recipients have to face another wave of challenges with actually getting housed, including discrimination from secure housing. There is some voucher holder discrimination. There are some preconceived notions about who possesses a voucher and how they will treat the property. So landlords aren't as willing or interested in renting to voucher holders. Affordable housing, DC is becoming very popular, and the housing market is very expensive. The Housing Authority and Department of Human Services has a guideline. So based on the size of your unit, there's a cap on how much they will pay for rent for that unit. And while it is illegal to discriminate against voucher holders, it happens because if a landlord lists the property just as much as $50 above what's acceptable to the Housing Authority and to Human Services, it won't be covered. They're not eligible for it. And what we're seeing is that we have both individuals and families who kind of get priced out of a particular area and get forced into certain sections of the city. So we have, and based on their trauma history or their experiences, they don't want to return to that part of the city. They want a change of environment, a change of security, but they have to face that level of discrimination, affordable housing, gentrification. Unfortunately, the layout of DC is changing, and with it, access is changing. And then units for larger families. Sometimes we have families that need 6 and 7 bedroom units, and that's not very easy to find in the city, and to find that's affordable, and to find that's, being managed by a good landlord who will make the necessary repairs, because there's an element of inspections and repairs that need to be made in order for a voucher recipient to stay in that unit. Because once the Housing Authority of Human Services issues a voucher, they want to make sure that the person is stable and that it's a safe environment. So that was just my rundown. I didn't take too long, but I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea of what I've seen over my years of working in the Housing First model and working very closely with those applying for vouchers, and some of the barriers that we run into, but some of the great benefits we run into. So I will give it back to Chris for questions.
Yes, thank you. I think that was very, Elle and Anna, thank you. Very thorough rundown of the process here. And as you may have seen, we have about 24 questions, I believe it is, in the chat. So I'm going to we'll try to get through as many as we can, everybody. And let me jump around a little bit and see what I know that has come up in emails to me. And I'll try to start from the top, but I'm going to do a little cherry picking based on what I've seen. How many of the 24,000 citywide vouchers are in Ward 3? Can we speak to that?
So I can't speak to the 24,000. I can speak to the DHS portion, which is about 6,000. And I think we can follow up on the broader question. Out of the 6,000 DHS voucher holders, we have about 350 who are in Ward 3. We really hope that using a tenant-based program, that people can choose where they want to live and will choose to live all over the city versus being concentrated in areas where there's less opportunity for them. But we do have the majority of our voucher holders in wards 6, 7, and 8. So there's about 350 in Ward 3.
Very good, thank you. You may have, I think you've covered this, but I'll just ask the question. Are landlords required to accept vouchers?
Yes, you are not allowed to discriminate based on source of income. Doesn't matter who is paying the rent. Okay.
What happens when, oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I had a question. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't interrupt you. This is concerning local fundings. I don't know if you guys are discussing this. because I have a client who is on lookup fundings, and I've been having issues with having him relocate. So are you guys just...
You should feel free to, if it's about a specific client, feel free to send me an email and we can redirect it to the right program. I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
No, thank you for asking the question. What happens when a family won't let a case manager in when they come to visit?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So case management services are voluntary. The vast majority, I think it's something like 95% of our clients receive case management services, but it's by choice, and clients can opt out if they don't want or don't feel like they need case management services. So there are times when, just like I'm sure for any of us, it's not a good time for someone to come visit. I know case managers, do their best to schedule appointments and find times that work for their clients, but there are certainly times where it's not the right time to come visit. And so they're not required, just like any of us, not required to let anyone into their home. But I know that, there's a lot of coordination that is happening to ensure that clients are able to meet with their case manager at a good time.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And for participants who may not want to engage with case managers, it's never just make one attempt, and if they don't want to speak, it's over. It's give them space, opportunity, let them know that you're there. Sometimes it's a matter of rapport building, or if they're going through something at the time, just not wanting to speak. But it's not something that, if they say, I don't want to talk to you today, that doesn't come back, because as the voucher suggests, it's a permanent supportive housing voucher. So we will continue to support you up until, like Anna said, you've opted out of services completely. Otherwise, initiatives continue to be made. We think outside the box. We've had clients who will be disengaged for a month or so, but one call at the right time will allow you to reestablish that rapport. So it's a constant relationship of, we are here. Even if you want to push us away, we're here. We're going to continue to come back. We're going to continue to use gentle hands and give you space and opportunity to be receptive to this level of care.
Thank you. Do we have numbers on the gaps that exist between the vouchers and available units? And the follow-up question to that is the issue that there's not availability, or there's no availability of affordable units, or no availability of larger units?
All of the above, actually, all of the above. There is a disparity in the number of people who need housing vouchers and subsidies and the availability of housing vouchers and subsidies. Once you close that gap, there's a disparity between affordable housing and those who need that affordable housing. And then there's another disparity in the appropriate size units for the people who need those units. So it is a size gap and disparity on every level. I don't have the exact numbers, but there's a gap on every level. There's almost always a greater need than we have access to resources for. And like I said, that's on each level.
Is there any screening for the voucher program for past violent or criminal behavior?
There is some screening. There's eligibility requirements for anything that's federally funded, and also some of the locally funded. The idea is to be inclusive and to provide people with supports that they need to be successful and stable. And so it's relatively limited in terms of what would exclude you from the program, but there are eligibility requirements that include past criminal history, particularly around sex offender status. And all of that is public. So that's, if it's helpful, I can provide more information on that follow-up.
Thank you. Another question in the chat, excuse me. The police say that the reason case managers aren't involved with families as much as they should be is because their caseloads are too big. Is that, what is being done about this? And, because sometimes the police end up doing social work. I think I've stated that question, so I'll open that.
Elle, do you want to start? Yeah, I see you.
Yeah,
Go for it.
no, that's not the case at all. In my 7 years of working with families, rarely incidents where we'll run into MPD doing more case service than the provider is. Now, whether or not the participant, like I mentioned earlier, wants that engagement, it has to be a two-way street. So while they're going through a crisis, we can present the opportunity to help, to partner, to support them. But if they're not receptive, there's so much that we can do. And it's not necessarily a matter of caseload, because there is a cap on how many cases a case manager can have when they're dealing with a family and with an individual. Now, as we know, families come in all sizes. A family is a family of two, a mom and one child, or a family is also mom and dad and 7 children. That's also a family. So there is a cap, but there's rarely an occasion where law enforcement will be doing more of the case management than the providers. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but no, in terms of caseload, that's not an issue. It's more around engagement. That's where you'll see the biggest concern come in, if that family hasn't bonded with the case manager, or they haven't built that level of rapport, or they're still adjusting.
And if I could just chime in just briefly there, I just wanted to also flag that we are coordinating very closely with MPD and also at the deputy mayor level. So that includes not just MPD, but the other public safety entities and leaders in the district. And we completely appreciate that there are times when police officers are involved in really difficult situations, though I completely agree with Elle's comments in terms of how case management services are provided and the level of case management services. That doesn't mean that MPD is never involved. And I have seen like a couple of different comments about police officers saying this. We are coordinating very closely with MPD. We talk to them every single week. And so are looking for, I think in general, the vast majority of clients in our program are really getting the level of services they need or developing these close relationships with their case managers. But when there are gaps in services or needs, we definitely want to see them. And so we're hoping that this partnership with MPD will help us to identify if there are clients or others who have just additional needs that are not being met.
Thank you. Chandra, you have your hand up.
Sure. I just wanted to kind of chime in around this conversation around the case management piece. I think it's important that we understand what case management is and what it is not. I think there may be some misunderstanding on the role of the case manager and what the relationship between the case manager and the participant looks like. First, I will say the case manager does not hold autonomy or agency over the participant or the family. Just because you are receiving subsidy for housing does not give any case organization, PSH provider, the right to these services to disempower the individual. Yes, we are in a partnership with this participant or this family, and that partnership is built around collaboration and just that empowerment. I don't get my team of case managers that we do not get to take that away from you because you met a criteria for housing. So what does that look like operationalized? Yes, we have a very scripted mandate as what engagement should look like, as Anna outlined at the minimum. I will say that's just what it is. That's the minimum. There are many individuals and families that require way more beyond what is outlined as our contractual obligation around engagement. But even with that participant holds the autonomy to engage in that case management and what that level of engagement looks like. I think it's important that we understand who we are serving. These are not just individuals that need housing. To qualify for PSH, it is so much more than just needing a permanent residence. These are individuals that sit at the intersections of issues around behavioral health, addiction, disability, literacy, immigration, a variety of factors. And all of those things contribute to what the outcomes of the case management will look like. And so as I look at some of the comments in the chat and the questions, I want to make sure we have a proper, authentic understanding of what case management is or is not. We don't, we don't operate from a place of we get to kick your door down, we're going to force you to engage. I think the other thing you need to understand, there is a why if someone doesn't want to engage. Now it is our responsibility to figure out why does that participant not want to engage. It could be my behavioral health issues. It could be the grief and loss that I'm experiencing in the moment. It could be the mishandling of a system that I've tapped into for years, where I know before I engage, you all are going to have to demonstrate a very high level of trust for me to trust you as a case manager, as an organization, as a system. It could be the relationships I've just had with my neighbors that I'm right now just don't want to be bothered. It could be because I am a BIPOC individual and I just trust anybody that does not look like me based on how I've been treated in my neighborhood. So I want to make sure we understand that just because case management comes with it and the outcomes made for someone looking on the periphery doesn't look like that case management is working. Case management is individualized, person by person by person by person. There's no scripted narrative that we follow, but it is built on empowerment. We are, at least I'm speaking for Friendship Place, we follow the lead of the participant. Again, now within the auspices of what is expected of us as a provider. But no, if disengagement, now I'm not saying that there aren't areas of improvement around case management. By no means am I saying that, but I want to make sure that those who are raising these questions as well, we just have a general understanding of what case management is and is not, because I think then we will have a better understanding of how to interpret what we're looking at. We'll have more realistic outcomes. And then the community, the neighbors, the residents, the other systems are better positioned to support the case management process. Also, and then I'll chime out, please understand that to qualify, as I said, for PSH services, these are services that DHS does not mandate. These are services that does not fall under the purview of Friendship Place. We do not provide disability services. We're not Department of Disability. Behavioral health is not under our umbrella. That's another system. That's a whole nother system. And while the case manager and the participant have this wonderful rapport and they have these great service plans and engagement is happening, remember, this is a system. We do not hold the space to dictate or determine what the quality of services and the efficacy looks like for services that are delivered out under those systems, be it DBH, education, CFSA, and some of those others. So I think it's important that we understand, have much more of a macro understanding of what case management is and what it is not.
Oh, thank you. That's very powerful. I think it's very important for people to, as you said, understand as we talk about the process. I'm going to keep going through some of the questions in the chat here. Someone reports that in her building, people have been attacked by other tenants. And when they report this to the property manager, the property manager says if the tenant is a voucher holder, they can't do anything about it. So Anna, what would you suggest the proper approach if someone is finding a conflict within their building? What's the best way to handle that?
So, I assume all of us on this call feel like everyone should be able to be safe in their home and in their building. And certainly if there are public safety concerns, you should involve MPD or others. Your property manager should certainly not be saying whether someone is a voucher holder or not, and they may not even know. This sounds like, so yeah, I can't speak to any specifics. But certainly if there's public safety concerns, you should, involve the public safety agencies or MPD. If there are not public safety concerns, I don't get along well with every single one of my neighbors. I think we all have a lot of work to do around community building and engaging with our neighbors and making sure that everyone is able to live safely and happily in their building. So I'm not sure really what else to say about specific incidences. I'm not sure what to say about specific incidences, except I'm also just going to say that I worry a lot when I see comments that seem to sort of presume that crime or violence in a building is because of voucher holders. I think those are sort of slippery slope assumptions. Yeah, and so I would just sort of caution people away from that. You know, I hear a lot of comments like this, and I think a lot of us would agree, you know, domestic violence is not associated or connected with poverty. And so people who are having their rent paid by someone else are not necessarily more or less likely to be involved in some of these public safety concerns. So
I would like to jump in as the person who asked that question.
sure.
Nicole, I live in Ward 3. I've lived in Ward 3 for about 20 years. And, you know, in my building, you know, I do understand what you're saying about people should not be identified as such, but that has already happened with people being identified. And also not only that, with services creating sort of a divisive environment, telling some voucher holders to be aware of community members so that because of a fear that they're going to do something to them. To speak specifically, we do have security in our building. We do have security presence, but what we've noticed is, you know, some of the same themes that you're talking about. We want a safe community for all beings here. Doesn't matter how you pay your bills. We want that for everyone. I'm the leader of the Tenants Association. We represent everyone here. What we're finding, including with some of our tenants who have identified as voucher holders, they don't find it safe. They're finding we're having guns found. We're having people attacked by knives in the hallway. We're having people who have been attacked physically by other tenants. And this is an increase in the level of violence that we have never seen. And I've been in this building for 5 years. And we're simply trying to get it under control because we have not been given the resources to handle the type of diverse community that we're now presented with. None of us are social workers. Our property managers are not either. And we are in a position where we're now reaching out to find out, well, how are we going to be resourced? Because we as the individuals in these apartment communities are now the ones who are doing the outreach, who are providing the food, who are providing the blankets, who are providing the masks to other community members, and also trying to do public safety to help people to understand what it's like to live in a shared community, because these resources and these lessons are not being taught. I mean, we're talking even basics concerning things like how to use appliances, because the number of fire visits, carbon monoxide visits, things like that that we're experiencing, we're just not resourced for that. And so we're reaching out to say, well, what do we do for a mixed community so that we are all safe, so that we are all safe in our homes from you know, fire harm, violence, and other things, because those resources are not coming in. And we do understand that it's a choice. We do understand that all tenants have a choice. But what we do need is we need all of the people who are in the housing now to be resourced so that we are all safe, and so that we all understand what it's like to live in a shared community in ways that respect the property and respect the other tenants. Whether or not you like someone or not, you can always be professional. You can always share space in a way that is not causing violence or harm. And that's the gap in performance that's we're experiencing. And we're finding our community is actually now there's about 50 of us now that are actually now trying to provide that, because our management company is not, and we don't have social support that's doing it. And we don't have really building security that's doing this. And we're not trained in this. I work 3 other jobs to afford the rent in my building. So you know, this isn't something that I look to take on, but it's something that was important to me and my family in my community here, so that we can continue to be here in Ward 3 safely.
If you don't mind me chiming in for a second, I just wanted to kind of just touch on a couple of those issues. Whether you live in the district, Maryland, or Virginia, there is an adjustment when living in shared housing if you're living in an apartment space. And at no point does anyone want anybody to feel unsafe. So I just wanted to correct one thing that I heard, that if the person is a perceived voucher holder, that you're not able to do anything. That's absolutely incorrect. There's nothing in the subsidy profile that says a resident is not subject to eviction, or that a resident isn't held to the same lease agreement requirements than anybody else who's an unsubsidized renter. If there is a valid issue with violence or a safety issue, absolutely involve MPD. If there is a case manager connected, they will find out what happened and will partner with that person accordingly. So don't feel that if something comes up, whether it's a perceived voucher holder or it's not, that you shouldn't call MPD to help come support, mediate, and address the issue, because that's a safety issue. People who have subsidized housing have the same amount of opportunities as those not receiving subsidized housing to comply with the lease agreement. There's nothing in a subsidy packet that says that they are beyond reproach or that they can't be held to that standard. Another thing is we have to understand that where, as you said, it's a very mixed population and we're all living together. That's the nature of the District of Columbia. It's a very mixed bag. And what we're seeing is an increase of people trying to move out of one area into another, and there being some friction. And another thing that you have to understand is there's fear on both sides. As Chandra pointed out, they have been vulnerable and victimized by the system for years. So when they come out of an area that have, where they've experienced violence in their neighborhood, abuse, trauma, poverty, mental health, substance use, physical disabilities, and decide to go in an area where that may be less prevalent, they're just as afraid of you as it seems as you're afraid of them. So it may be suggested that, oh, there's weapons, there's violence, but they sometimes feel very uncomfortable in their own home because they're being scrutinized. They're being held to a higher level of behavior as grown people and individuals with families to abide by rules that they're being told that they should abide by. So every time they do something that's out of step with your comfort level, the police may be called, or they're going to get in trouble, or they're getting attacked. So that fear operates both ways. It looks very different of what you're fearful of, but it operates both ways. So we do not want you to have
I just wanted to clarify something, just to say that these are incidents that are actually reported by the property management, saying we found a gun in X tenant. We had an ATM where burglars came in and they were wearing face masks with weapons, and MPD had to be called. We had another tenant who attacked another tenant at knife point. We had another tenant, I was violently attacked by a tenant. So these are actual incidents. These aren't sort of projections. These are
understood, but that
reported. And so my source of my question in bringing these things to the table is really, what do we do as a community of tenants to get the support so that we can all thrive in these buildings, because it's not present. And I'm not trained as a social worker. I'm not trained as MPD, but what I am is an organizer, and I'm an organizer impromptu doing what I can to keep it safe and keep everything in a really community building space for everybody here. So I'm just asking the groups that are on this call, what can you do to support us so that we can be in a position to thrive together? Because the resources aren't there. I don't have a budget for the things that we're doing as a TA, but we're working very hard to make it a really great place for everybody here.
Chandra had her hand, Jean-Michel, between you and Chandra did have her hand up, unless Chandra, you want to defer to Jean-Michel, or how you want to handle that?
Jean-Michel, you can jump in by all means. I can follow up.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand up, but go ahead and then I'll follow if you want to.
What I will say, first, I want to celebrate the dialogue here. I want to say this is critical dialogue. This is the kind of dialogue in this kind of safe, moderated space where we see resolution. It is a hard dialogue. There are different points of views. We operate from different lenses, and we bring our diverse professional and personal backgrounds and experiences to the dialogue. I celebrate that. I hope that everyone else on the call recognizes that is what it is and joins me in the celebration thereof. What I will say is, one, I want to center what is being highlighted as and affirm those are legitimate concerns. I by no means, as a social worker, am I dismissing that. I want to live in what I define as safe. I want people there. We have what we expect to be for our home environment, for our children, for our level. So again, I don't want to discredit anyone's comment or what is shaping what I think is a very critical dialogue. What I am saying is I think there is room for this kind of dialogue and to move this to an even greater level of collaboration. I think there are opportunities where many of the civic and community organizations need to mobilize, not with amongst themselves, but with other providers to help shape the resolution. Now, do know in collaboration, there is no I win, you win, it's we win. So what I bring as my areas of prioritization may not be matched by those who bring their different diverse perspectives to the table. However, the goal is to reach a place of resolution or action where it suits all of us. I think, so what I would posture anybody in this conversation, as we see we got the differences of opinions and lens, I would admonish, and I can speak on behalf of Friendship Place as it relates to PSH services and case management delivery. That is what these webinars are about. We welcome the feedback. This is not something we were asked to do. This is something we postured ourselves to do, to create these kinds of spaces. And so neighbors, community groups, other nonprofits, my mobilizers on the ground, my advocates, there is a way that we can collectively, and as well as participants. I'm not going to X participants out of this narrative because that's a voice I don't want to center. You don't get to center. The participant gets to center his or her or their own voice. But there is a way to collectively come together with diverse perspectives and move this conversation to some action. Now, again, this is going to take some work, but I would hope as we are going back and forth, as I watch the exchange and the dialogue in the chat, that we can take this and move this a little bit further beyond this webinar, and each person collectively doing some introspection and saying, okay, what can I contribute to the resolution? I want to see change, but what can I contribute? As an organization, I can posture myself on behalf of my cluster to say, okay, what can my cluster within Friendship Place offer as a help or guide to the neighbors in this war, or who's seeing this? I can also offer myself that same position myself to support our participants. Again, participants have a voice. And what happens when someone doesn't have a voice, or when they feel that voice is not being heard or has been taken from them, you are going to see presentations of behavior that may look very different. Again, we're talking about individuals who sit on the extreme margins of life, something that many of us sitting in this space we can't speak to. That's not our lived experience. Now, I'm not excusing behavior. I am trying to set a framework where we understand each other, because if we can get to that shared level of understanding and collectively form a body of community, I think you might see some change that's advantageous for all parties involved. And so, I just would want to admonish that, again, your question, and the name escapes me, what can we do? What you can do involves the support from us, but also involves your support and buy-in engagement as well. Maybe we need to stop moving in silos. The civic groups are going to do this. The nonprofits are going to do this. What would it look like if we stepped across the lines and figured out, okay, regardless of my different perspectives and what I feel about this issue, this demographic, this age group, what happens if I abandon that just enough to step across the lines and we collectively come together as a body of individuals? We may see something that looks very different. So that is my response to what we can do. We need you, you need us, but you also need the participants. So maybe we should work and admonish, and I hold myself to this level of accountability as well. Maybe we need to start to create some, we're talking a lot, and I welcome the talk, but maybe we need to now create some spaces we all can collaboratively come together to figure that out. Because I don't think there's a one answer or one aspect of this, one group holds the answer or the power to fix this. This is going to take concerted, deliberate, consistent effort to create safety as well as housing and a community. I think that's the goal for the participant. And the one last thing, and John Michelle, I'll definitely pivot to you. Elle, you touched on this, and thank you for centering us. Regardless of what you may think and what you see in the presentation of behaviors, most often than not, our participants are asking to escape violent areas. And I know what you see, but when they have that choice, they pick those units, it's a reason why they want to move out of what they know is familiarity with high crime, violent areas. They don't want that life.
Mhm.
And so I want to chip at that narrative too. They don't want that life. I see that 90% of the time when we ask them what areas they want to live in, they want to escape the very thing that you're saying you don't want. And so there's a commonality. While they look different, they meet a different threshold as it relates to income. You all, as well as the participants, share that commonality. Neither one wants to live in an environment riddled by crime and safety concerns. So that alone is a common place that we possibly can build upon and begin to see what this looks like and maybe shape this and move this along a little further. But I definitely wanted to add that to the conversation. Okay,
Great.
I promise now I'm done, Jean-Michel.
No, thank you. And actually, Jean-Michel, do you mind if I toss to Anna first? Because I think that this is a natural, we are actually at that hour mark, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time because I do know folks need to go. But Anna, you put something in the chat, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to say this aloud here. Presumably DHS is interested in working with tenant associations to make sure that the entire community is served. But I'll give you a chance to say that, and also make your pitch there based on what you wrote in the chat.
Yes, and I know we're at time, and I think Chandra and Elle said everything and more that I would say. The only thing I was going to add is that I know there are real issues here to address. I know that the mayor is taking this very seriously. Some of you may have been at the meeting the mayor had with tenant associations on Connecticut Avenue last week. And so we are looking for other solutions and other actions. And if there's a request for additional resources, we would really welcome that conversation and partnership. So I will leave it there. I have lots more to say, but I'll leave it there and appreciate the conversation. And Jean-Michel, I'll turn it back to you.
And actually, we have a hand up. Amy Zan is up. If we can take a few more minutes, everybody, thank you. Amy, did you have a comment for us? Amy Schosheim?
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, that I am a licensed DC social worker, and I did place homeless vets when I worked for the DCVA in apartments, and I was much more hands-on. And at this meeting with the mayor, she acknowledged that because of COVID and other things, the social services that these families need has not been up to the point it should be. So that was for the mayor herself. And we were glad that we could combine with the mayor and talk about the problem the way things are, not the way things should be. Now, as I said in the chat, when this family she keeps her 5th grader out of school to watch the younger kids. And when he got locked out, he didn't have a key. The toddler, the microwave caught on fire. The toddler was screaming. The dog was barking. Smoke was filling the thing. And the fire department couldn't get him because there was no spare key. We are scared for the kids too. This isn't just self-interest. I am the guardian of my brother who's committed to St. We are worried about their safety too, and the children need to be supervised. And the woman who was beaten and thrown from the 8th floor of my building at the Connecticut House, and I am the tenant president here. They found an assault rifle in there. They found ghost guns. They found, we need to protect we need to protect everyone here. And so we're not finger pointing. We're talking about how can we get us all together to make it safer for everyone and to help people make good choices, because some of these younger people, they've been beat up by their partner who's not a leaseholder, but then they go down to the back door and they let them in after the individual's been barred and they get beat up again. So we need help. And I have furnished apartments here. I've bought groceries here. I've done everything I can, but we need your help to make this right. And Friendship Place does a better job than most of any of the other agencies. So please know that we are not bearing down on Friendship Place. We are seeing things where kids are at risk and we're scared for them and for ourselves.
Well, thank you, Amy, for sharing it. We're at time, but I just want to take a few more minutes to wrap up. This has been such an important conversation. And it's really good that people who live in the building are sharing, folks like you, Amy, Karen, Nicole, Karen Gaston. We understand, Karen, that everybody is a participant, including you, of course, and your neighbors who don't have vouchers and the voucher holders. I think what we're looking at is we know that from the conversation, a complex system to navigate with DHS and Anna's team doing what they can, with the resources they currently have, and this willingness to engage tenant associations is wonderful, Anna, and I think that will prove to be very effective. I think we've heard that we need to be careful not to mix conditions and to stigmatize and assume that everybody, because they belong to a group, is the same as another person. Everybody is different, that we know. We've also heard that everybody needs to obey the law, and that nobody in a building is above the law or somehow can be touched by the law. Everybody, we all as citizens have to obey the law and follow building rules. I live in a building and I follow building rules. In a building, you have to follow the rules. We know that. The fear conversation came back from the last webinar, and I think that's interesting. The fact that there's fear on both sides, but there's also a glaring reality. And I was speaking a while ago to one of the Ward 3 candidates for the DC Council, and he had some really good ideas about what could be built. It seems to me, having served in the ward for a long time and in other places before that, that there is a resource missing. As Karen Nicole pointed to, tenant associations can only do so much, and how we develop this new resource will be key. So there's a lot to look at there. Who needs what level of support, how to develop this level of support without somehow stigmatizing people who don't need it, but making sure people who need it do get it. And so my closing remark to all of you as constituents in Ward 3 is that you have the power. You are constituents in the city, and that you should have your voices heard. There is a need to build something. I'm not sure what it's going to look like yet, but it's probably going to look like some kind of very flexible program that can be deployed to the people who need it in Ward 3, because what we're hearing is just not, what we want to hear. The mayor herself has said it. And so I look forward to more conversations with you. We're going to have a webinar again in a few weeks. We have not decided exactly how we're going to frame that conversation, but it sounds a lot as if it should be framed toward building this new solution that just some people think we need. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your support. We could never do all this without you, as we always say. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. Yes.
Thank you.